Hi, I'm Rashonda. I'm the creator of artbyrow.com, where you can find over 200 art and drawing tutorials. My goal is to teach people to learn how to love their art, no matter what. Whether you're good, whether you're not good, we're all learning, we're all growing. So you gotta love your art along the way. If this sounds like something you're interested in, please like and subscribe. It helps us out, and it makes sure you get notified whenever any new videos get uploaded. Today's video, we're going to look at how to add drop shadows to your graffiti lettering. It makes them look really cool, and it's really easy to do. So join us for the video. We're going to head on over to the art studio. See you over there. When making drop shadows for your letters, there's really only a couple things you have to keep in mind. And this is the best way I found to illustrate that. So what I did was I cut out a couple of letter T's, one on white, one on black. So the white's going to be the letter, and then the black will be your drop shadow. So really the most important thing, when you're drawing drop shadows, your shadow is going to either be on the left or the right. It can't be on both. And it's going to be on the top or the bottom. It can't be on both the top and the bottom. So that's really the only thing you have to keep in mind. So what I did was I cut these out the same. I laid them on top of each other and cut them out so they matched. So my drop shadow, I could have it look like that, where it would be on the left, the bottom, down the left, the bottom, and then the bottom over here. You could switch it and make them go this way. And the distance, you can vary the distance also, because that's going to depend on your light source. And ignore that rounded edge. That's just happened to be the piece of paper I had handy. That should actually match and be squared off, but just ignore that part. But you can have your shadow, it can be different distances. It doesn't have to be all completely even, but it will be even, like the bottoms will be even with each other, but the left wouldn't necessarily have to be even with the bottom, but they should be even with each other. So anything on the left should be the same, and everything on the bottom should be the same distance, because that's going to vary depending on how your light source is, the angle of your light source. So if you are unsure on one of your letters and you're not sure how to make the drop shadow, you could always cut these out yourself and position them so you can see what they look like until you get the hang of it. And something like a letter T is pretty straightforward. That's a little easier. But if you had like maybe an S or a B, it could get a little tricky. You could just real quick cut out a couple letters and position them so you can get an idea what they look like. So just a quick tip. Like I said, this is the easiest way I've found to explain this, so it makes it a little bit easier to understand. And then we're going to move on and get into some drawings. Once you understand the concept of how to add your drop shadow, so we talked about it can be to the left or the right, the top or the bottom. So if we want to apply a drop shadow to an entire word, we want to keep this consistent throughout. So if I want to do this lettering that says dream, and I want to add a drop shadow to it, and using this as the example, or as the reference, I want my drop shadow to be to the left and to the bottom of my word dream. Notice how when you do it to the bottom, it's not going to go all the way up. Same thing when you go to the left, you're going to have some space off to the side. That's not crucial. If you don't do that, it's not a big deal. But it's just part of the concept of how to do it. And then the other thing we need to talk about is the insides of the lettering. So when I'm doing my letters and how they overlap, you need to think about, do you want your drop shadow to go over top of your other letters, or do you want to eliminate it there? And that's really just a personal preference. You can overlap it on your other lettering or not. So what I mean by this is, for my letter R, let me zoom in here a little bit. So for my letter R, I'm going to follow the shape of the letter, and I'm going to go ahead and do this right over top of this other letter. And you can do it that way or not. That's up to you. You can do just the areas behind the lettering, because when you add your drop shadow over top of your letters, it is going to cover up some of the lettering underneath. So that's just a matter of your personal preference and if you want to do that or not. So because I'm going to the left and the bottom, this part over here, this would be the right if I added that. So that's where keeping these things in mind really comes in handy. I'm doing the left and the bottom. So right here, this is kind of hard to see. I don't want a drop shadow on this section of the R, because that's to the right. But I am doing the left, so I want to do that here. And I'm going to go ahead and use my marker to fill this in so you can see. So I'm going to go to the left, and over here, I'm going to do the left, and I'm going to do the bottom, and I'm going to cut it off short of where it falls into the right side of that part, right here on the letter R. And then just take your marker and fill it in. And this typically would be black, but it would also be okay if you wanted to try doing this with a different color. That was part of your, whatever your color scheme is you're going to use. So if I darken that up, you can see it a little bit better. And as you can see, this is going to cover up part of this letter D here. So that's something you need to keep in mind. Is that what you want to do, or do you not want to do that? So I'm going to go ahead and work on this letter R a little bit more. And you really just need to take your time. Think about what you're doing. Don't stress out too much about making mistakes. If you mess up a little bit here and there, it's not going to ruin your drawing. Most of the time, it won't be obvious to anybody but yourself. So when I'm doing this inside, we're going to see the bottom, and we're going to see the side. So it's kind of opposite of the rest of it. So you don't want to do the bottom, because that would actually be the top for the cutouts. You want to do, you're looking at this shape here. So we're doing the left side of the shape and the underneath side of the shape for where your drop shadow is. So that would be it for the letter R. This isn't going to have anything because that's, excuse me, that's the right side. That's the top, so that's not going to have anything. So then you want to follow this throughout all your letters. And since I overlapped where my other letter is, then I want to do that consistently throughout. Whatever you decide to do, you don't want to do it for one letter and then go, I don't like that. I'm going to switch it up on the rest of them. Whatever you do, you want to make sure you keep it consistent throughout. So your lettering, your final artwork looks consistent. What you could do if you don't like how much that covers up, you could try to make your other drop shadows a little thinner. And that would look okay. It would just look like your R is further away than, like, it's offset more. The higher up that it is from the other letters, the more of a shadow it's gonna have on it. If it's all the way touching, there'd be a smaller shadow. So you could make your drop shadow on the rest of your letters a little bit smaller. Make it thinner so it doesn't stick out as much if you wanted to. That's something you could get away with. So we're just going to keep going through here doing this. And where these letters bend, so this is where it gets a little bit tricky in not stressing out too much about everything being completely perfect. That's where that idea is really going to come in handy. Because the way these letters bend and curve, sometimes it gets where, okay, is this the top now or is this the bottom? You can try to follow the bend. What I would say is go ahead and just do the whole length of it. Don't worry about where it actually flips from being the left to the right or from the left to the bottom or the top or how all those curves come in. Just do it the best you can. Like I said, if it's not 100% perfect, most likely nobody's going to notice anyway. You're going to be a lot more critical on your artwork than other people are. And really, I would like to see people get to the point where you're not worrying about what other people think of your artwork. Because oftentimes what happens is you'll post it on either social media or wherever you hang out online where you show off your artwork. And depending on the people that are on there, if you don't get the reaction that you were hoping for, now you feel discouraged and you're not as motivated to work on your artwork. And in reality, for most of us, what other people think doesn't really matter. Obviously, we all want people to like our artwork. We want recognition. We want to feel like we're on the right track with things. But at the end of the day, like for me, I create my artwork because it's a way for me to escape reality. And not that I have anything to escape from. I live a pretty good life. But sometimes you just want to get lost in your art and forget about the responsibilities of the day and everything that needs done, the ever-growing to-do list that you have. And sometimes you want to just focus on something that isn't really heavy and is just relaxing. So trying not to think about what other people are going to, are they going to accept your artwork or not accept your artwork? If you can get away from that, it'll really benefit you in the long run. So as I'm doing this letter E, here's where an example of where it gets really tricky. This line here, so even though it's on the left of this letter, the way this bends, it's starting to get to where it's on the top. So what you would need to decide here is, do I want to add some here, or would it make more sense to do something on the bottom of this part of it? And that's where these judgments come in that, okay, that's not 100% right, because we're starting to get into where it curves down. Now we're on the left side, or it would be the right side of this letter, where we're working on the left. So now we're starting to get into, we're on the right side of the letter, but it's kind of underneath, but it's kind of on the right side, where this one would be on the left side, but it starts coming into where it's in the top. This is where you don't want to overthink it and worry too much about, well, that's not 100% right. Just pick something and do it. It's really not going to be that big of a deal. Same thing here. This part right here is on the bottom, but now we start to get around to where we're on the right side. And we don't want to have it on both the right and the left. That would look really weird. If I added a drop shadow along this whole edge, that would not look correct. But this part right here, I could have a drop shadow, like just a small one there. Again, that's just a judgment call. You can add a little bit there, leave it off. It doesn't really matter. But it's something you want to pay attention to and to keep in mind when you're doing it. Same thing here, like this is the bottom, but it starts running into a little bit to where it's kind of the right. So you could do something like this where it's a little smaller at the bottom. We don't want to go this part because even though it's the left side of this, it curves around so much that it really starts to look like the top, where we don't want that. So this is what I'm talking about when I say don't stress out too much about it being 100% perfect, because a lot of these angles are going to start getting really tricky, especially when you're doing graffiti art. There's a lot of different angles and a lot of different things going on, and it can start getting a little tricky, which then starts to stress you out if you're worried so much about being perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and just fill this whole thing in because I think it's going to look better. And I don't think I mentioned, you want to try to keep your drop shadow so it matches the curves of your letters. So if this bottom part curves, you want to try to match that with the bottom edge of your drop shadow so that it's all uniform and consistent. So try to curve it a little bit. It can get really tricky to try to do all these things. It takes a little bit of practice. And again, while you're practicing, while you're learning, the more you do this, the easier it'll get to see things. I had a professor in drawing. It was I don't remember if it was drawing 1 or drawing 2 or whatever it was, but when I was taking art classes at the university, I had a drawing teacher that said, his comment was something like, I can't teach you to draw, I can only teach you to see. And it didn't make a lot of sense to me at the time. I'm thinking, what is this guy talking about? Like, this is a drawing class and you're telling us you can't teach us how to draw. But as we got into it and started doing things, it made more sense. So, and I tell you this to point out that as you're practicing and as you're working on your drawings and doing things that are a little bit out of your comfort zone, if you're out of your comfort zone, that's good. If you're doing something that makes you feel a little bit on edge, a little stressed out, a little uncomfortable, that's actually a good feeling because that's where growth comes from. If you're working on your artwork and you're doing always what's comfortable for you and you're not pushing yourself, then you're limiting your chances to grow. So you definitely want to do things that make you feel a little uneasy, that feel a little bit hard. But the more you do it and the more you practice at it, the more you'll be able to see different little subtle things from your artwork. You'll notice different angles that you didn't notice before. These things will become a lot more apparent to you, and it'll start to get a lot easier. So if it feels uncomfortable or confusing, or you're doing it and you're having a hard time seeing what would be the left, what would be the right, I mean, that seems like a really simple concept of left and right. Like, how hard is that? But when you're actually doing it, there's a lot more to it than just, I put it on the left, I put it on the right. Now, if you're looking at something like I showed this example of this letter T, all the lines are straight, that's really easy. But if you had a bunch of letters together, now that becomes a little bit more complicated. And where do I want to put lines? Do I want to
put my shadow here? Do I not want to put the shadow there? So sometimes these concepts that are really basic concepts can get a lot more complex depending on the type of artwork that you're doing. But I say all this just to let you know that if you're feeling a little uncomfortable or it feels a little confusing, to just push through it and keep working on it. And it will get easier. The more you do it, the easier it gets. So to get through it, don't stress out too much about being 100% perfect. If you mess up, it's not the end of the world. These tricky areas that it's kind of hard to tell, should I have a shadow here or don't I want a shadow there? Just do what you think looks right. And if it's not right, it's not the end of the world. Learn to love your art. Don't worry about what other people think. And have fun. Use it as an escape. If that's what you do, if it's a way to relax, then find a way to relax as best as possible. And learn to love your art. So that's it for the drop shadow. And I will see you soon.
Well, how'd you do? I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps us out, and we want you to get notified when there's new videos. We'll see you soon. Happy creating!